The Jackson County courthouse smelled of dust and old coffee, the kind that clung to the walls like shame that wouldn't leave. I sat at the long oak table, a notebook balanced on my knees, every page filled with numbers written in my small, square handwriting. I wore a gray business suit, not the uniform I once trusted like a second skin, and my hair was pulled into a knot so tight it felt like a helmet. Across from me sat the family I was born into, not the one I trusted my life with. My mother, Dolores Johnson, leaned forward, pearls biting into her neck. "You don't belong here," she hissed, loud enough for the gallery to hear. "All you ever did was count. Count cans, count bullets, you don't know how to live." Marcus and Dean, my two brothers, chuckled like schoolboys. Dean smirked, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against the table. "She counts bullets, not profits. You really think the judge will let her run Johnson's mart?" The lawyer they hired, a man who smelled like aftershave and arrogance, rose with a flourish. He held up one of my notebooks like it was contraband. "Your Honor, these are not financial records. They're the scribbles of a woman with obsessive problems. Obsession is not leadership." The gallery murmured. A woman I once babysat shook her head, whispering to her husband. A cousin I hadn't seen in years shifted in his seat, eyes glued to the floor. I felt every gaze pressing into me, turning my notebooks into evidence of madness. I looked at the judge, then back at my family. They wanted me erased with the stroke of a pen. They wanted every deployment, every convoy I managed, every medal on my chest to vanish under the word unstable. But the numbers didn't lie. They never had. I opened the notebook on my lap. Columns of inventory figures stared back at me, neat as a prayer. For 3 tours, I had managed more than $50 million of equipment without losing a single round. I remembered the desert nights in Iraq, counting crates under a flickering flashlight while mortars echoed miles away. I remembered Afghanistan, convoys crawling through ambush country, every gallon of fuel tracked, every spare part accounted for. Soldiers lived or died on the accuracy of my numbers. I lifted my chin. "This isn't obsession," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "This is survival." The lawyer laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Spoken like a soldier, but this is commerce, not combat." I closed the notebook gently, as if the pages were fragile. They didn't know the truth hidden inside. Numbers that told a story of fraud, of missing stock, of invoices signed by hands that were not mine. They didn't know that I had been watching Johnson's mart bleed money for years, quietly recording the losses while they called me a freak. "MS. Johnson," the lawyer pressed, pacing before the jury box like a man delivering theater instead of justice. "Did you or did you not write down how many steps it took you to cross your own living room? Did you or did you not log the number of times you stirred your coffee?" Laughter rippled through the gallery. My mother's lips curled into a victorious smile. I clenched my hands under the table until my nails bit skin. I remembered Afghanistan again. The ambush at 2 a.m., headlights exploding, bullets screaming overhead. I had crouched behind a wrecked Humvee, counting the seconds between gunfire to time our squad's escape. Counting had saved 23 lives that night. Now, in this courthouse, it was being paraded as disease. The judge shifted in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly at the lawyer's theatrics. He tapped his gavel once. "Proceed carefully, counselor." I sat back, breathing slow, hiding the tremor in my hands beneath the table. I knew humiliation well. I had lived with it since I was 8 years old, and humiliation was only the first stage. What came after? The counting, the silence, the precision. That was where I had always found my strength. The lawyer strutted back to his table, confident he had painted me as a lunatic. My brothers whispered something to each other, shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. Dolores dabbed her lips with a handkerchief, a queen satisfied with the ruin of her own daughter. I stared at the polished wood grain before me, remembering the smell of ink and diesel, the long nights when my hands cramped from writing every figure twice just to be sure. Each mark of graphite in those notebooks had been written under fire, under exhaustion, under a will to keep men alive. If they wanted to laugh at that, let them. But trials aren't decided in a single insult. Wars aren't won in the first volley. As the gavel tapped again, the memory began to rise, unbidden. Not this courtroom, not the oak and marble, but a garage that smelled of rust and beans, where an 8-year-old girl lined up soup cans and counted each one out loud while her family laughed. That was where the story really began. The first memory I can never shake is the smell of rust and beans in that garage, a summer afternoon when the air was too thick to breathe. I was 8, crouched on the cement floor with a row of soup cans lined up like soldiers. I whispered the numbers under my breath, tapping each can with my finger as if the rhythm itself would keep the world in order. Behind me, the laughter of my family filled the room like static. "Look at her," Marcus said, all swagger at 12, counting beans like a crazy person. Dean, only 10 but already mimicking him, added, "She thinks the cans are her friends." My mother leaned against the doorway with a glass of iced tea. "Amy," she said, voice sharp, "normal girls play dolls, not line up tin cans like soldiers." The words cut, but I kept counting. Numbers were clean, pure, safe. People lied. Numbers didn't. That night, long after the others had gone to bed, Grandpa Joe found me in the garage again. The old man still carried the army in his posture, shoulders squared, hands like weathered leather. He lowered himself onto an upturned crate and said, "Counting is survival, little ghost. Wars are won or lost by beans and bullets." I looked up, surprised. "You mean it's not weird?" He chuckled. "When I was in France, 1944, I tracked every shell, every ration, every drop of fuel. They thought I was obsessive too, but my platoon never went hungry, never ran out of rounds. Counting kept them alive. You've got the same soul, Amy. Don't let anyone tell you different." From that night, he called me Little Counter. He said it with pride, like it was a medal. The rest of the family said it with disdain, a curse I couldn't shake. By the time I was 9, the notebooks started piling up. Cheap spiral pads, covers smudged with grease. I counted everything. Steps to the bus stop, cracks in the sidewalk, the hours between my father's drinking spells. Each number anchored me when the world spun too fast. Once at breakfast, I muttered the tally of sugar cubes left in the jar. Dean snatched my notebook and waved it at Marcus. "She even writes down how many times we chew before swallowing." My mother snatched the book from his hand and tossed it into the trash. "You'll never live a real life this way," she said. I pulled the notebook out after everyone left, pages crumpled but intact. That was the first time I realized I would always be at war with them. One afternoon, Grandpa Joe took me out back where the woods pressed against the yard. He handed me an old ammo box heavy with rust. Inside were yellowed sheets of paper, supply manifests from his war. "You see this," he said, pointing to a line. 97 helmets delivered, 97 helmets issued. None missing, that's what kept us alive." I traced the ink with my finger, feeling a connection to him deeper than blood. "So I'm not broken." He shook his head. "No, you've got a gift, but the rest of them, they'll never see it. To them, numbers mean bills and bank accounts, things they mismanage. To you, numbers mean truth. That scares people." I tucked his manifests into my own notebook, hiding them like contraband. But gifts don't protect you from cruelty. The next week, Marcus caught me reciting the digits of pi I'd memorized. He shoved me against the wall. "You're a freak," he said. Dean laughed so hard he nearly choked on his gum. I didn't fight back. I just whispered another sequence under my breath, letting the rhythm steady my heart. At dinner that night, my father raised his glass. "Marcus is our star, Dean's our charmer, and Amy," he smirked. "Amy will be our accountant if she doesn't lose her mind first." The table erupted with laughter. I kept my eyes on my plate, counting peas. Only Grandpa Joe stayed quiet, his gaze locked on me like he saw the storm no one else noticed. Later, as I tucked away another notebook, I heard his voice from the hall. "Don't let them break you, little counter. One day they'll understand." But they never did. The ridicule only deepened as I grew, each year another layer of mockery. By middle school, teachers called my parents in for meetings about my obsessive tendencies. My mother told them, "She'll grow out of it." My brothers told the neighborhood kids, "She's got counting disease." I found refuge only in the garage, surrounded by cans and crates, by the lingering smell of oil and dust. Numbers filled the silence, shielded me from their words. I wrote until my hand cramped, each tally a reminder that order existed somewhere. Still, every tally carried an edge of loneliness. Every digit whispered the same question: how long before the world collapsed again? That question followed me into high school, into every hallway where Marcus strutted like a king and Dean laughed like a sidekick. I carried my notebooks tighter, knowing they could be ripped away any moment. And then came the night that proved just how fragile order could be. The night of Marcus's accident, the fall none of us would forget. The night of Marcus's accident still clings to me like smoke. It began with the same pattern as every hunting trip. Early fall air, rifles cleaned, tree stands strapped to our backs, the smell of pine and damp leaves. I was 14, trailing behind my brothers as they moved with the careless swagger of boys who had never been doubted. To them, the woods were a playground. To me, every step was calculation: distance to the creek, number of rounds in my pocket, weight of the pack on my shoulders. Marcus climbed the tree stand first, bragging about the buck he'd bring home. Dean followed, tossing acorns at me. "Don't distract us with your counting, Amy," Marcus said. "Last thing we need is your numbers making me miss." I whispered the distance to the clearing, the wind shifting through the branches. Marcus rolled his eyes. "See, freak can't shut it off." Then it happened. A crack of wood, a slip. Marcus's shout tore through the trees as the stand gave way. He fell hard, the sound of bone and bark colliding. Dean screamed. I dropped my rifle and ran to him. His leg bent at an angle no human limb should bend. Blood seeped from a gash on his forehead. His eyes fluttered, panic replacing arrogance. I pressed my jacket against his head, counted his breaths, 1, 2, 3, steadying myself so he could steady too. "Don't move," I ordered. "Dean, get help. Run now." Dean hesitated, tears streaking. "It's your fault, you distracted him." I ignored him, focusing on Marcus. "Stay with me, keep your eyes open." I counted again, his pulse faint under my fingers. 27, 28, 29. By the time help arrived, I had stabilized him enough to keep him breathing. Paramedics lifted him onto a stretcher, asking who had done the first aid. Dean pointed at me reluctantly. She kept him alive, but even as he said it, his eyes burned with blame. At the hospital, my hands were covered in his blood, dried into the creases of my skin. I thought, maybe now they'll see. Maybe now they'll understand numbers aren't madness. They are survival. But when Marcus was wheeled past with pins in his leg, my mother's eyes found me. "This never would have happened if you hadn't distracted him with your nonsense. You and your counting, it's dangerous." The truth that the tree stand had been rotten didn't matter. They had found their villain, and it was me. At school, the story spread fast. "She pushed him," some whispered. Others laughed, calling me killer accountant. Teachers looked at me with pity, some with suspicion. I walked the halls, clutching my notebooks tighter as if they could shield me. Marcus eventually returned, his leg encased in metal and scars. He limped, but still smirked. "You think you saved me?" he spat. "You ruined me. I could have been a football star. Now look." Dean nodded beside him. "She's bad luck, always has been." I wanted to shout back, to tell them I had kept him alive, but the words died in my throat. Grandpa Joe tried once quietly. "If it weren't for Amy, you'd have buried your boy that night," he told my mother. She only shook her head. "If it weren't for Amy, he wouldn't have fallen." That was the moment I knew the line had been drawn. I wasn't just the odd one out. I was the scapegoat, the family's monster. In the garage, I traced the faded ink of Grandpa's manifests, reminding myself that precision had once been honored. Somewhere, someone would see it for what it was. Discipline, not disease. Still, the loneliness settled heavier after that night. I found myself awake at 3 a.m., whispering sequences under my breath just to steady the silence, mapping patterns in the ceiling cracks as if numbers could shield me from blame. When dawn broke, I carried that same notebook to school, pages swollen with scribbles, my secret proof of a truth no one else wanted to hear. I slid my notebook under my pillow and whispered numbers into the dark. They were my anchor, my only proof I still mattered. But deep down, a seed had been planted. If my family saw me as dangerous, maybe I needed to prove them right on my own terms. And soon I would find the one place where counting wasn't madness, where it was power, the army. By the time I turned 18, the walls of that house felt like a cage. Every whisper in town, killer accountant, freak, curse, pressed tighter around me. My brothers strutted through high school hallways like kings while I kept my head down, notebooks clutched to my chest. The accident had sealed my place as the family scapegoat. If Marcus limped, it was my fault. If Dean missed a grade, it was my distraction. One night, lying awake with the sound of their laughter spilling down the hallway, I made the decision. I wouldn't waste another year trying to prove anything to them. I would prove it to myself. The Army recruiter's office sat 3 blocks from my school, its window display filled with posters of soldiers in desert camouflage. The slogan read, "Be all you can be." For me, it read, "Be more than they said you are." At Fort Jackson, the air smelled like sweat and gun oil. The days cut into drills and shouting. For the first time, my counting didn't make me an outcast, it made me precise. While others stumbled through weapons checks, I tallied rounds twice. While they lost track of gear, I logged each item in my head. At night, when lights went out, I whispered sequences under my breath, steadying my nerves. Instead of laughter, I earned nods. Drill Sergeant Miller, a man with a voice like gravel, noticed it. "Johnson," he barked during an inventory inspection. "How the hell did you know we were short 3 canteens before the count was official?" "Because I counted them on the truck, Sergeant," I said, standing at attention. His eyes narrowed, then flicked to his clipboard. He gave a grunt that almost sounded like respect. "Not bad, Private. Keep that up." It was the first time authority had ever praised me for what my family called disease. Basic training broke others. For me, it was transformation. Every mile run, every obstacle scaled, I measured, logged, improved. Numbers gave me order in chaos. By the time I finished, I wasn't the freak. I was reliable, consistent, unshakable. From Jackson, they sent me to advanced training, then overseas. My first deployment was Iraq. The heat hit like a hammer, the sand working into every seam of our uniforms. Convoys stretched across highways scarred with craters. Supplies became lifelines. Fuel, ammunition, rations. And I was responsible for keeping them from vanishing into the desert. "Sergeant Johnson," Captain Reeves said one morning as we prepared for a convoy, "this yard is valued at $15 million worth of equipment. Not one screw better go missing." "Yes, sir," I replied. Inside, I welcomed the challenge. For months, I tracked everything that moved in and out. Crates of MREs, drums of diesel, cases of body armor. My ledger was exact, and when inspectors came, they found 0 discrepancies. Word spread through the unit. Soldiers began calling me Count. The nickname stuck, but for the first time it wasn't a weapon. It was respect. One night, insurgents tried raiding the supply yard. Sirens blared, rifles cracked in the dark. While others scrambled for cover, I grabbed my flashlight and sprinted to the storage rows. I checked locks, recited serial numbers, marked what had been touched. By dawn, we discovered only a single box disturbed, because I had been there, counting before chaos swallowed everything. Captain Reeves pulled me aside after the smoke cleared. "I don't know what drives you, Johnson, but whatever it is, keep it. You may just be the reason this company stays supplied." Hearing that, I thought of my mother sneering over kitchen tables, of Marcus and Dean laughing. I tucked the words away like armor. The Army Commendation Medal came after that first tour, a small ribbon, but to me it was proof. The very thing they mocked had become a tool the Army valued. I wore it on my chest the day I returned stateside, hoping maybe, just maybe, the family would see. But when I stepped back into that Tennessee house, metal polished, uniform pressed, my mother didn't even glance at it. Marcus muttered, "Figures they'd give out medals for bean counting." Dean laughed and said, "She probably counted the medals too." The silence I carried into my room that night felt heavier than any rucksack. Still, Fort Jackson had lit a fire in me, and Iraq had proved it. If my family wouldn't see, the Army did. And soon, Afghanistan would test me even more, where my counting would no longer just save supplies, but lives. Afghanistan was different from Iraq. Iraq had been heat and dust, the constant grind of convoys across scarred highways. Afghanistan was mountains that cut the sky into jagged teeth, valleys where danger waited behind every ridge, and roads that could turn into death traps without warning. I was 21 when I landed at Bagram, stripes on my sleeve, the weight of a supply yard on my shoulders. "Johnson," the battalion commander said, his boots grinding in the gravel, "you're responsible for keeping this machine running. Convoys, depots, air drops. Without you, the line dies. Don't fail." "Yes, sir," I answered, though failure wasn't in my vocabulary, not when lives depended on numbers. Convoys became my battlefield. Every truck, every crate, every liter of fuel was accounted for in my notebooks. I tracked routes, weather shifts, even how long drivers took to smoke a cigarette. I counted because surprises got people killed. Soldiers began to notice. If Count says we've got enough, they'd mutter, "We've got enough." Trust was born from precision. One evening, a contractor approached me outside the depot. He wore a pressed shirt, gold watch flashing in the Afghan sun. "Sergeant Johnson," he said smoothly, "sign this invoice. Nobody checks too closely. Easy money, $50,000 for you." I stared at the paper. It claimed a shipment of tires that never arrived. $50,000. My family back home lived in debt. My brothers bragged about money they hadn't earned. My mother still called me a freak. For a second, temptation whispered. Then I pushed the paper back into his chest. "I don't sign ghosts." His smile didn't falter, but his eyes went cold. "You'll regret that." Days later, our convoy rolled through a narrow pass. The first explosion ripped through the lead Humvee, fire lighting the rocks. Gunfire erupted from the ridges, the air filled with smoke and chaos. I hit the ground, shouting coordinates, counting the bursts of fire. 3 seconds between volleys, I yelled. "Move between them." Soldiers scrambled, dragging the wounded, firing back in rhythm with the enemy's reloads. Bullets chewed dirt inches from my face. My hands shook, but I kept counting. Timing, movement, precision. It was the only way to stay alive. By the time air support arrived, we had held the line. No supplies lost. No soldier dead. Afterward, Captain Reeves clapped me on the shoulder. "Your counting just saved 20 men, Johnson. Remember that." Word of the ambush spread fast. Soldiers started calling me more than Count. Some said Guardian, others the sergeant who never missed a number. The nickname felt heavier now, not just about cans or bullets, but lives tallied against the chaos of war. Weeks later, investigators uncovered what I already suspected. That contractor had orchestrated the attack. Bribes, fake invoices, ambushes staged to cover missing supplies. He vanished before charges could stick, but I carried the memory of his gold watch flashing in the sun and the echo of his words. "You'll regret that." The Army gave me another commendation medal, citation noting my unwavering precision under fire. It felt surreal, medals for doing what my family called sickness. I polished it at night, not for them, but for me. Still, when I called home, the silence was the same. "They gave me another medal," I said into the phone. On the other end, my mother's voice was flat. "Don't brag, Amy, you make us sound like fools." The line went dead. I sat in my tent, staring at the ribbon in my hand. Soldiers outside laughed, telling stories, alive because I had counted seconds between bursts of gunfire. My family laughed too, but only to tear me down. Two worlds, two versions of me, the savior and the freak. The divide grew sharper each day, but so did my resolve. If numbers could outwit fraud, if they could hold a convoy together through an ambush, then maybe they could hold me together too. I leaned over my notebook, writing every detail of the attack, every interval, every mistake avoided. On the last page, I wrote one line: "Numbers don't betray you." The words steadied me. I shut the notebook and looked toward the ridgeline, where the sky burned orange with another Afghan sunset. Tomorrow would bring another convoy, another test, another chance to prove that precision meant survival. But people did betray. And soon, betrayal would come from the place I least wanted it, my own family, waiting back in Tennessee with cold eyes and sharper tongues. The ceremony at the Pentagon should have been the proudest day of my life. The marble floors gleamed, flags hung in perfect rows, brass polished until it shone like fire. Soldiers lined the hall in dress blues, their ribbons flashing. I stood among them, the Army Commendation Medal pinned once more to my chest, my name read aloud as if the precision of my numbers had finally been carved into history. Applause filled the air. Generals shook my hand, each grip firm, each nod a quiet acknowledgement that my work had kept soldiers alive in a place where minutes and supplies meant survival. Reporters snapped photos, pens scribbling notes about the young supply sergeant who never missed a number. But when I looked toward the rows reserved for family, the seats were empty. 10 chairs sat vacant, reserved in my name. My mother hadn't come. Neither had Marcus. Neither had Dean. After the ceremony, a young lieutenant asked, "Sergeant Johnson, your parents here." I swallowed, the lie bitter on my tongue. They couldn't make the trip. He nodded politely, not knowing the truth that they never even returned my invitation. That night I sat on the edge of a bunk in the visiting quarters, the metal case heavy in my hands. I dialed the number I'd memorized since childhood. The phone rang, then clicked. My mother's voice, sharp and impatient, came through. "Hello, Mom, it's me," I said softly. "I wanted you to know. I got the medal today," they said. Her voice cut me off. "Stop showing off, Amy. We don't need to hear about your obsession. You make us sound like fools when you brag about counting." "I'm not bragging," I whispered, but the line had already gone dead. The medal glinted in the low light, gold and green, but it felt like lead in my hands. For every cheer in the Pentagon, there was silence in Tennessee. For every soldier who shook my hand, there was a mother who hung up the phone. I thought of the ambush in Afghanistan, the way men had lived because I counted seconds. I thought of the ledger I refused to sign, the fraud I had stopped. Yet my family dismissed it all with a single word: obsession. Weeks passed. I returned to duty, but the silence grew louder. When letters arrived from my brothers, they were not congratulations. Marcus wrote, "Enjoy your medal. It won't fix what you ruined." Dean scribbled a single line, "Don't call us. We don't have a sister." Each word cut deeper than shrapnel. I folded the letters and tucked them inside my notebook, the same place I logged fuel shipments and serial numbers. Numbers were exact. Words were poison. One night, as the bass generator hummed outside my tent, I sat awake staring at the metal case. I traced the edges, remembering the applause, the camera flashes, yet the emptiness in those reserved chairs drowned it all. My family had not just rejected the metal, they had rejected me. Still, the army demanded presence. Convoys rolled, supplies moved, and I performed as always, precise, unshakable. Soldiers looked at me with trust, calling me Count, asking if the numbers matched, if the supplies would last. Their faith carried me when family betrayal gnawed at my core. But every evening, when the ledger was closed and the yard fell silent, I felt the void. The applause had been loud, but the silence afterward was louder. One sergeant knocked on my tent flap once, holding a mug of burnt coffee. "Hell of a day, Johnson, you should be proud." I managed a smile, but the words stuck like ash in my throat. Pride didn't survive the silence of empty chairs. I held the notebook close, whispering numbers into the dark. Not to calm myself this time, but to remind myself that order existed, even when love didn't. The army saw me. The world beyond saw me. My family never would. And yet, even in that void, a whisper of resolve began to grow. If they would not recognize the worth of my counting, then I would make it undeniable. The next chapter of my life would not be about medals or applause. It would be about proving that numbers could save more than convoys and soldiers. They could save even what my family had already doomed to fail. That resolve carried me back to Tennessee, where Johnson's mart stood on the edge of collapse. The shelves were bare, the books bled red ink, and the family that rejected me was about to lose everything. When I stepped back onto Tennessee soil, the metal still packed away in its case, I found Johnson's mart barely recognizable. The parking lot was cracked with weeds. The neon sign flickered with half the letters burned out. Inside, shelves stood empty, dust clinging to products nobody had touched in months. Shopping carts rattled with loose wheels, and the smell of mildew lingered in the corners like a ghost. A family lawyer in a pinstripe suit met me at the entrance. "Your brothers asked me to call you," he said smoothly. "They thought perhaps you could assist." His tone carried no respect. It was the voice of a man who saw me as a scapegoat waiting to be blamed. Marcus and Dean stood behind him, both in pressed shirts but with tired eyes. Dean spread his hands. "You're good with numbers, right? Maybe you can help us figure this out." I scanned the aisles. Pallets sat half unloaded, inventory lists were nowhere in sight. Receipts were stacked in shoe boxes, faded ink and missing signatures. "This isn't just mismanagement," I muttered. "This is bleeding money." Marcus scoffed. "Don't start with your army talk. This is retail, Amy, not war." I pulled out a small notebook, the same kind I carried overseas. My pen scratched across the paper as I counted what remained. 20 boxes of detergent, 14 bags of dog food, 6 registers, 2 broken. Every number painted the same picture, decay. Everything was missing, I said flatly. Not just products, discipline, order, truth. Dean crossed his arms. "Here we go again, the freak with her lists." The lawyer cleared his throat, pulling out a folder. "The situation is grave. Bankruptcy is on the horizon. Creditors are circling. Unless something miraculous appears, Johnson's Mart will close its doors within the year." I looked at Marcus. His limp was still visible, a reminder of the accident that had haunted us all. He stared back with resentment. "Don't think you're here to save us. We called you because if this goes under, it'll be on you too. The Johnson name doesn't get split 3 ways, it falls together." The words stung. I wanted to walk out, leave them to choke on the ashes they created. But the sight of Grandpa Joe's old photo hanging by the customer service desk stopped me. His eyes, steady and sharp even in black and white, seemed to watch me. Counting is survival, little counter. I opened another box of receipts. Dates didn't line up, suppliers billed for goods that never arrived. Thousands of dollars had evaporated into thin air. My gut tightened. Fraud wasn't a possibility, it was a certainty. "You've got supplier fraud here," I said, sliding the papers across the counter. "Someone's billing you for stock that never touched these shelves." Marcus slammed his hand on the counter. "Don't accuse us of fraud." "I didn't say you," I shot back. "But someone is stealing from you, and you let it happen." Dean sneered. "Here's the real truth. You cursed this business. Ever since you left for the army, things went downhill. Now you show up with your notebooks like you've got all the answers." The lawyer raised his brows. "Perhaps it would be best if Sergeant Johnson kept her opinions quiet. Courts don't look kindly on unstable patterns of behavior." My hand tightened around the notebook. His words echoed those I had heard 100 times: unstable, obsessive, freak, the same chorus sung in a different key. But silence had never saved me before, and it wouldn't now. I rose from the counter, the notebook open in my hand. "You can blame me all you want. You can call me unstable, obsessive, dangerous. But numbers don't lie, and these numbers say you're being robbed blind." For a moment, the room was silent. Marcus's jaw tightened, Dean shifted uncomfortably, the lawyer adjusted his tie. I turned toward the empty aisles one last time, the silence of the store pressing down like judgment. "This place isn't just failing," I said. "It's already on life support. If you want to save it, you'll need more than excuses. You'll need the truth." I closed the notebook and slid it into my pocket. My brothers thought they had called me home to take the blame. What they didn't know was that I had already begun counting the lies, and soon I would uncover the ledger that proved everything. The first time I saw the safe, it was buried in the back office under piles of yellowed receipts and unopened mail. The lock was old, the kind with a stiff dial that clicked too loudly in the silence of the failing store. Dean pretended it wasn't there when I asked. Marcus said it held old insurance papers, but the way their eyes flickered told me otherwise. One evening, after they left, I stayed behind. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting long shadows across the empty aisles. I turned the dial, listening for the tumblers. Years in the army had taught me patience. Supply depots didn't forgive mistakes, and neither would this safe. After 15 minutes, the lock gave way with a tired groan. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger, its pages swollen from use. The handwriting was Dean's. The entries were neat, too neat, lines of supplier invoices with inflated numbers, payments marked as cleared, signatures looping in a way that screamed pretense. I sat at the desk and flipped through page after page. Tires billed in bulk that never arrived. Crates of detergent marked delivered but missing from shelves. Dozens of supplier names I'd never heard of. The fraud wasn't sloppy, it was deliberate. The weight of it pressed on me. My own brother had been signing these pages, feeding the business to vultures while blaming me for being the family curse. The door creaked. Marcus stood there, limp heavier after a long day, his eyes narrowing when he saw the ledger in my hands. "What the hell are you doing?" His voice was low, dangerous. I closed the book slowly. "Looking at the reason your store is bleeding. That's none of your business," he snapped. "Put it back." "It's our family's business," I shot back. "And it's fraud. Whoever's behind this is robbing us blind, and Dean's signature is all over it." Marcus's face tightened. "Don't you dare drag him down. You've been blaming us for everything since we were kids. First my accident, now this. You never stop, Amy." I rose from the chair, the ledger pressed to my chest like a shield. "This isn't blame, it's math, and the math says someone's stealing." For a moment we stood there in silence, the hum of the lights between us. Then Marcus shook his head. "You'll destroy this family if you keep pushing." "I'm not the one who destroyed it," I said. "I'm just the one counting what's left." That night I couldn't sleep. The ledger sat on the table in my motel room, its numbers taunting me. My pen moved across a fresh notebook, cross-checking invoices against bank records I had already pulled. The discrepancies glared back, undeniable. The store hadn't simply collapsed, it had been gutted from the inside. The next morning, Dean cornered me by the loading dock. His smile was tight, forced. "Marcus says you've been snooping. You need to stop. Some things are bigger than you." "Like what?" I asked, voice steady. "Like keeping this family intact." His jaw clenched. "If you care about us, you'll let it go." "Letting it go is what got us here," I said. "You signed those pages, you let them rob us." Dean's eyes darkened. "Watch yourself, Amy. You've already been the curse once. Don't make it twice." He walked away, but the threat lingered in the air. That evening, I sat in the store's dark office again, ledger open, my notebook beside it. The truth was bigger than Dean's lies. Suppliers, payments, missing goods, it all painted a picture of a conspiracy that went beyond my brothers. Someone outside the family was pulling strings, and they had used Dean's weakness to open the door. I leaned back, exhaustion burning in my eyes. For years, I had been the scapegoat, the freak, the obsessive girl with her notebooks. But now the notebooks weren't just defense, they were weapons. Each page was ammunition, each number a round chambered and ready. I closed the ledger, slid it into my bag, and whispered the numbers under my breath. Fraud was a pattern, and I had spent my whole life finding patterns. The next step would not just pit me against my brothers. It would drag me into a courtroom where every page of that ledger and every scar of my past would be used against me. The trial began on a gray Monday morning, the courthouse steps slick with rain. Reporters huddled under umbrellas, their cameras aimed at the glass doors as if they were waiting for blood. When I walked in with the ledger tucked beneath my arm, the whispers followed. "That's her, the obsessive sergeant, the freak with the notebooks." My dress suit clung damp against my shoulders, but my spine stayed straight. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with a kind of hunger. My brothers sat at the plaintiff's table, their lawyer crisp and confident, silver hair gleaming under the lights. He smiled at me like a wolf spotting easy prey. My mother sat behind them, lips pressed thin as if she'd already written the verdict herself. When the proceedings opened, the lawyer rose with theatrical flair. "Your Honor," he said, "this case is not about numbers. It is about instability. It is about whether a woman obsessed with counting, who records steps and spoons and coffee stirs, can possibly be trusted with a family business." He held up one of my old notebooks, pages filled with the handwriting of a 12-year-old girl. "Look at this," he said, turning toward the jury. She wrote down how many cracks there were in her bedroom ceiling. She tracked how many times her brothers laughed at dinner. This isn't accounting. This is pathology. The jury shifted uncomfortably. I felt the heat of humiliation crawl up my neck, the same humiliation I'd known since childhood. But I refused to flinch. The lawyer pressed on. "She claims her brothers are responsible for fraud. But how can we trust the words of someone who obsessively catalogs the world around her like a prisoner scratching tallies on a cell wall?" The judge glanced at me, then at the ledger on the defense table. "Sergeant Johnson, you will have your turn." When my chance came, I stood, the ledger heavy in my hands. "Numbers are not madness," I said evenly. "Numbers are truth, and truth doesn't vanish just because you don't like it." I opened the book, laying it flat for the jury to see. Invoice 200 tires billed, none delivered. Payment signed, cleared. Supplier listed, non-existent. This isn't obsession. This is theft. Dean shifted in his chair, color draining from his face. Marcus leaned forward, whispering furiously to the lawyer. I turned another page. 30 crates of detergent billed at triple the market price. Signed off by Dean Johnson. The lawyer sprang to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. These are the ramblings of a woman with a disorder. Even her own family has said so." The judge frowned. "Overruled. Continue." I locked eyes with the jury. I counted crates in Iraq under mortar fire. I counted fuel in Afghanistan while bullets ripped the air. Those counts kept soldiers alive. The same discipline I used there, I used here. And what I found is a pattern of lies. The lawyer sneered. Or a pattern of delusion. He snapped his fingers and an assistant wheeled forward a box. He reached inside and pulled out a stack of my childhood notebooks. He flipped them open, scattering pages across the floor. This is what she calls truth. Endless scribbles, tallies of meaningless details. This is obsession, not accounting. Laughter rippled in the gallery. My mother allowed herself a thin smile. I bent down, picked up one of the fallen pages, and held it up. You laugh at these. You call them meaningless, but look closer. Every page, every line, it's consistent, it's accurate. 10 years of records, never once proven wrong. You call it obsession, I call it evidence. The courtroom fell into a hush. The judge leaned forward. Are you saying your personal notebooks have been corroborated against financial records? Yes, Your Honor, I said firmly. Line for line, they match, and the discrepancies reveal fraud that cost this family business millions. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then the lawyer chuckled, low and bitter. Even if that were true, the damage is already done. What kind of leader keeps books like a lunatic child? I met his gaze. The kind of leader who refuses to look away when everyone else does. The kind who counts because lives and livelihoods depend on it. The judge banged his gavel. We will reconvene tomorrow. This court will examine the financial evidence. As the room emptied, I caught Dean's eye. His jaw was tight, sweat darkening his collar. Marcus glared, but beneath his anger was fear. My mother wouldn't look at me at all. I gathered my notebooks, stacking them with the ledger, my hands steady despite the pounding in my chest. Today had been humiliation again, but tomorrow would be reckoning. And I knew that what came next would not only test the truth of my numbers, but expose the shadow I'd glimpsed behind my brothers, a force outside this family, waiting to be dragged into the light. Sleep didn't come the night after the first hearing. I sat at the motel desk, the ledger open, my notebooks stacked like sandbags in a trench. Outside, neon lights buzzed, and every time a car passed, I expected someone to step from the shadows. The lawyer's attacks had stung, but the fear in Dean's eyes told me the truth was more dangerous than anyone admitted. By 3 a.m., I was still awake, whispering numbers to steady my breath. Patterns surfaced in the ledger, dates, invoice amounts, repeated signatures from suppliers who didn't exist. It wasn't just sloppiness. It was a system, and I had tracked it for years without realizing. I pulled out an older notebook, one from my first deployment. Between fuel tallies and convoy logs, I had scribbled notes from bank statements Dean once asked me to double-check. At the time, I thought I was helping. Now, cross-referencing those numbers with the ledger, I saw it, losses that matched perfectly, 10 years of bleeding hidden under the family name. The next morning, I carried the ledger and notebooks back into court. The lawyer tried to smirk, but his eyes flickered when I placed a stack of binders on the defense table. These aren't obsessions, I told the judge. These are records, 10 years of anonymous reports I filed under another name to keep the business alive. The courtroom rustled. The judge raised his brows. Anonymous reports. I nodded. I worked with banks, with auditors, even with local regulators. Every time I saw a number that didn't match, I filed it quietly. I never signed my name. I was the anonymous watcher of this business, and I have every document here. Dean's chair scraped as he half rose. She's lying, he shouted. She's making this up to look like a hero. Sit down, the judge ordered. But the damage was done. His panic was visible, his guilt plain. I opened one binder, pointing to an email trail. Every warning, every anomaly I documented. Payments that disappeared. Suppliers who billed without shipping. And every time I tried to speak, I was told to shut up, called a freak, dismissed. So I filed under a number, not a name. The bank called me the anonymous watcher. The jury leaned in. For the first time, their eyes weren't full of pity. They were curious. The lawyer tried to recover. Even if she did this, it only proves she is obsessive to the point of paranoia. Who would track numbers in secret for 10 years? I met his gaze, someone who refused to let her family drown, someone who counted because no one else would. The judge motioned for me to continue. I laid out page after page, cross-referencing invoices with missing inventory, highlighting Dean's forged signatures. With every document, the silence in the courtroom deepened. Finally, I placed one last envelope on the table. Inside was a letter, creased and yellowed, the handwriting shaky but strong. I recognized it instantly, Grandpa Joe. The judge unfolded it and read aloud. Counting saved my platoon in France. Counting will save this family if anyone listens. My granddaughter Amy has the gift. Don't dismiss her. Trust her numbers. They won't lie. The words hit the room like a shell burst. My mother shifted uncomfortably, but she didn't look at me. Dean stared at the table, knuckles white. Marcus leaned back, eyes wide, the fight draining from his face. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Grandpa Joe's voice, silent for years, had risen in that room. It was validation I had craved my whole life. The lawyer sputtered. A letter, that proves nothing. The judge rapped his gavel. It proves credibility, and combined with the evidence, it proves pattern. He fixed his gaze on me. Sergeant Johnson, your testimony will continue tomorrow. This court will hear every number you have. As the gallery stirred, I gathered the notebooks, sliding Grandpa Joe's letter back into its envelope. My hands trembled, but not from fear. For the first time, the ledger of lies had been matched by the ledger of truth. But I also knew this wasn't over. Exposing Dean was only the beginning. The suppliers, the shadow network behind those invoices, they were still out there. And the courtroom was about to become a battlefield bigger than family. When I left the courthouse, the reporters swarmed. Microphones shoved forward, voices demanding, Sergeant Johnson, are you really the anonymous watcher? I kept walking, the notebooks clutched to my chest. I wasn't ready to answer them. Not yet, because the fight was shifting. And in the next round, I would have to show the world that the obsessive girl they mocked was more than a witness. She was the architect of the truth. The second week of trial opened with a storm outside the courthouse, the kind that rattled windows and drowned the air in gray. Inside, the tension was thicker than the rain. Reporters filled the benches, pens ready, cameras already humming. Everyone knew something heavier was coming. The lawyer for my brothers paced with the confidence of a man certain he could twist truth into fiction. He gestured to the jury, his voice rising. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard Sergeant Johnson describe herself as an anonymous watcher. But obsession is not leadership. She was a soldier, not a businesswoman. She counted bullets, not balance sheets. Are we really to believe this woman is fit to run a multimillion-dollar enterprise? He turned to me, sneering. Tell us, Sergeant, what experience do you have in commerce beyond scribbling in your little notebooks? The jury shifted. Some leaned forward, others folded their arms. My mother smiled faintly, sensing victory. Dean's hands tightened on the table. Marcus avoided my eyes. I rose slowly, my notebook in one hand, but in the other I carried something they had not seen. A slim leather folder embossed with a corporate crest. I set it down on the defense table, the sound sharp enough to make the gallery quiet. You asked what experience I have, I said, meeting the lawyer's eyes. I'll answer. I opened the folder and slid out a business card. The jury leaned closer. On it was my name, Amy Johnson, Director of Global Procurement, Fortune 500 Corporation. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge leaned forward. Explain. I kept my voice steady. For the past 3 years, while serving my final term in uniform and transitioning to civilian life, I have been managing procurement networks for one of the largest companies in the world. $3 billion in global supply chains pass through my oversight. I negotiate contracts, I root out fraud, I ensure efficiency. The same precision I used in Iraq and Afghanistan, I use in boardrooms across continents. The lawyer blinked, caught off guard. That card could be fake. I lifted my chin. Then call the company, call their CEO, call any one of the vendors whose contracts I renegotiated. Ask them how many millions we saved last year. Ask them who found the leaks in their systems. They will tell you, Count Johnson. The gallery erupted, whispers colliding like waves. My mother's face paled. Marcus stared, lips parted, as if seeing me for the first time. Dean muttered something under his breath, but his voice trembled. I pressed forward, placing documents before the jury. Here are audits, signed and sealed, proving the systems I built. Here are contracts I oversaw, fraud I prevented, savings tallied to the cent. You mocked my notebooks, but Fortune 500 calls them strategy. You laughed at my obsession, but industry calls it accuracy. What you dismissed as madness became the backbone of billion-dollar operations. The lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Proceed, Sergeant. I faced the jury. My family always told me counting made me broken, but numbers don't betray, they reveal. They revealed fraud here just as they did overseas, just as they have in every contract I've touched. I count because lives, livelihoods, and legacies depend on it. Silence followed, heavy and unbroken. Then I turned, looking directly at my brothers. You said I ruined this family, but it wasn't me. It was you, blind to the theft happening under your noses. You chose to ignore it. I chose to count it. Dean's face flushed red. Marcus dropped his gaze. My mother's pearls trembled in her hand. The judge cleared his throat. The evidence speaks loudly. This court will take it under review. But it is clear Sergeant Johnson is not simply obsessive. She is qualified, perhaps more than anyone here imagined. As the gavel struck, the gallery erupted again. Reporters rushed to the doors, already shouting headlines. I gathered my notebooks, my badge, and the letter from Grandpa Joe. My heart pounded, but my steps were steady. On my way out, a reporter shouted above the chaos, "Sergeant, is it true you saved the Army millions overseas and now billions in business?" I paused only long enough to say, "I saved what others let slip away." Another voice cut through the storm of questions. "Do you plan to take over Johnson's Mart now?" I stopped at the courthouse doors, rain streaking the glass, and answered, "If I do, it won't just be to save a store. It'll be to prove what numbers can build." I walked past my family without a glance. They had spent years branding me a freak. Now the world knew better. Still, I knew vindication in a courtroom was only one battle. The next step was larger than family, larger than one store. I had to decide whether to save the wreckage of Johnson's Mart or let it die. The storm outside raged as I stepped into the rain. I didn't flinch. The final chapter waited. The chance to turn all my scars, all my counting, into something more than survival. It was time to build a legacy. The rain hammered the courthouse steps as I walked away from the storm of microphones and cameras. My suit clung to my shoulders, heavy from the downpour, but my steps were lighter than they had ever been. For the first time, the world had seen me not as a freak, not as an unstable soldier, but as the woman who turned counting into survival and survival into mastery. I didn't look back at my mother or brothers. Their silence followed me, but it no longer carried weight. The trial had peeled away the last shreds of their power. Now the question lingered, one the reporters had thrown at me on my way out. Would I take over Johnson's Mart or let it collapse into the dust? I returned to the store the next morning. The parking lot was cracked, the neon sputtering, but through the windows I saw possibility. Empty shelves were not ruins, they were blank pages. I walked the aisles slowly, running my hand along the frames. I imagined them full, not just of goods, but of order, efficiency, purpose. The employees who had survived the collapse trickled in, hesitant at first. They looked at me with the same uncertainty I'd seen on soldiers about to climb into convoys. I gathered them near the registers. "This store has been bleeding," I said. You've seen it, you've lived it, but I know how to stop it. Counting isn't madness, it's discipline, and discipline can save this place. A cashier asked softly, "Why would you help us, after everything your family said?" I thought of Grandpa Joe, of his letter read aloud in court. I thought of every convoy, every tally that saved lives. Because numbers don't care about insults, I told her. Numbers reveal what's broken and how to fix it, and I'm not done fixing things. Over the next weeks, I tore apart the books. I built a new system, digital, relentless, airtight. Every shipment logged, every invoice verified, every cent tracked. Fraud had nowhere left to hide. I taught the employees to follow the process, to trust the numbers. Shelves began to refill, creditors backed away, and customers returned, curious at first, then loyal again. But I knew one store wasn't enough. Johnson's Mart had fallen because it was built on carelessness passed down through generations. What I wanted to build had to be bigger, stronger, something that could outlive me. That's how the Count Academy was born. I rented a warehouse on the edge of town, painted the walls white, and filled it with long tables and laptops. Veterans came first, men and women who had carried rifles one day and found themselves jobless the next. I stood before them with a notebook in my hand. "You know discipline," I told them. "You know how to count minutes in a firefight, how to measure rations when supplies run low. That skill doesn't vanish when the uniform comes off. It can be rebuilt into business, into survival for your families." They listened. They learned. Soon they taught others. Count Academy became more than training. It became community. People who had been dismissed, underestimated, forgotten like me, were finding strength in the order of numbers. One evening, I walked out behind the academy where the ground sloped toward a patch of grass. I carried a small magnolia sapling, its roots wrapped in burlap. The same tree my grandfather had once planted behind the old store, the one that had died years ago. With my hands in the dirt, I planted the new tree. I whispered to the soil the same phrase I had written in my notebook after every trial and humiliation: "Numbers don't betray you." The sapling bent in the wind, fragile, but it stood. Months later, Johnson's Mart reopened under new management, mine. The shelves were stocked, the systems humming, the employees working with pride. My brothers had disappeared, their names buried under debts and silence. My mother never returned, though I heard she once passed the store and refused to look at it. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the sound of customers in the aisles, the steady hum of the registers, the certainty that for once, the math was on our side. On the first anniversary of the academy, I gathered the veterans and townspeople for a ceremony. We stood under the magnolia tree, its branches already spreading wide. I told them, "This is not about one family's fall. It's about proving that the things people laugh at, the things they call weakness, can be the very tools that save us." Counting saved me. Counting saved this store, and counting can save anyone willing to learn. The applause was warm, not like the hollow clapping of strangers in a Pentagon hall, but the kind that came from people whose lives had changed. As the sun sank, I felt peace. The void left by my family's rejection would never be filled, but something better had grown in its place. Not acceptance from those who never cared, but purpose with those who did. If you've stayed with me through this story, I hope you carry one truth. What others dismiss in you may be the very thing that makes you powerful. Never let their laughter erase your worth. Thank you for walking this road with me. May you find peace, may you find health, and may you never stop counting the things that matter. If this story spoke to you, I invite you to subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and stay with me for the journeys yet to come. Stories like mine don't end with trials or medals. They continue every day, in every act of resilience.